Hello. Today I'm going to talk about the timeline, which is the second in the series, which leads up to individuation, or rather, should I call it agency, because it's just about you really knowing who you are and having the authority to make your decisions and go by your decisions. Okay, so when I talk about the timeline, I talk about going back on your life, looking back on your life. And because we're all different ages, there may be a lot of years for some of us. So the best thing that I found to do is to go in 7-year periods and see per period who you were, what happened, uh, what made you who you are today. But first of all, take those periods and go in depth into those periods. So the first will be 0 to 7. The second will be 8 to 14. The next one will be 15 to 21, and then 22 to 28, and then 29 to 35, and then 35 to 42, and from there 42 to 49, 50 to 56, 56 to 63, etc. Okay, just carry on working in 7-year periods. So why this is important is because when we look into who we are, we often, you might have heard of inner child work. So we're able to access that version of ourselves, and so we don't have, like, if you are looking at, say, from your 60s or 50s, you'll have a lot of life to look back on. So if you are going in 7-year periods, you can focus more intensely. So what you do is you take an A4 book and allocate anything 4 to 10 pages, more or less, depending on how much you're going to write and how in depth your focus is going to be for each period. But yes, allocate 10 pages. That will be good. Okay, so once you do that, you find a period of time which would be maybe an hour, a couple of hours, maybe half a day for each time period, and think about your successes, your failures, what you learned about yourself, what you accomplished, what you didn't accomplish, and what you enjoyed, what you didn't enjoy, and just write everything down, and write down events, and write down things you remember from your life history. Some of it might be quite traumatic, in which case maybe you would, if necessary, want to see a therapist beforehand. Otherwise, just write down everything that you can remember, or everything that you want to remember for now. So 0 to 7. When I look back on that, it was the time when I was an eldest child, but then I had a sister born 16 months after me, which affected who I was. The sister was quite a bossy person, and she got her way, and so I was kind of pushed to the sideline. But after that, there was another sister born 2 years afterwards, and then there was a brother born about 2 years after that. So there were really there were 4 of us in 5 years born, children, siblings in the family. And when you've got a situation like that, you actually, well, I did actually feel very cramped. I felt cramped into a corner, and I didn't have the attention of my parents, and that really affected who I was, and in good ways and in bad ways. And I'm going to elaborate on that just now. And then there was a younger brother born after that. So I'm one of 5 siblings, and he was born 4 years afterwards. And in our day, the boys were held in higher regard than the girls, and it was in our family it was kind of reversed. You know, what the people got in the particular positions in the family. Now, this is not to feel sorry for myself, but it's to see how I progressed with that. Um, okay, so basically, I'm sure you might have a very different uh, childhood pattern, and to take into account maybe some events that influence that. And uh, like one that stands out for me in the financial realm is I wasn't taught about money. So when I was in grade one, I I saw all these kids going and buying, well, actually going and getting sweets and chips and cold drinks and whatever from this little shop, which I just discovered when I walked along because I wasn't even told about it. And then I went there and I asked for the items, and I didn't know about money. So the girl who was serving at the tuck shop had to give me a lesson about money. So I went to my mother afterwards and I said, well, this is what happened. And then I got 5 cents pocket money every week, every Friday after that, which could buy me a packet of chips, but only because I approached the issue with someone else, which I don't know if you would nowadays call that childhood neglect, or, but just not giving your children enough education, basic things. But anyway, don't worry, I caught up. I did battle a bit when I was in grade one because I was not taught how to write or anything. In preschool, we were not taught to write then, but I caught up quite quickly. So I would say in that time I did feel a bit out of my depth, and then I was a target for bullies at school, and I was totally naive. And my name was Paula. It still is Paula, but it was Paula, and Paula means small and humble, and that's exactly what I was in those days. And I suppose I still like to be humble, but I really have tried to, I don't know, be so-called a bigger person, not a person who's a shrinking violet or has to hide in corners or anything like that, because I was very shy. So I'm sure you have a different experience, but I'm explaining my timeline now. Okay, so you maybe compare that and write down your own notes on that. So then, from age 14, 8 to 14, that's when I started maybe getting a bit more social, but I had friends who were uh, I only had friends who were uh, I preferred one-to-one deep relationships to uh, to group dynamics. I wasn't really one to be a groupie, so I did my own thing. Um, and then so, um, but also in that time, I started enjoying music. I started enjoying singing. I started wanting to be part of the choir, which I wasn't, and I had a hard time because I wanted to be a part of the choir and I wasn't. And I was at a convent school and they were very strict. The nuns were strict, and I was one of their favorites. So I had a hard time there. Um, but I had a lot of fighting spirit until I suppose when I was in standard three, when it got a bit, standard three is about 10 years old. Okay, so when I was 9 is when my youngest brother was born. And so we all had to be clamoring for attention. So for a while, I got into my own, with my singing and the things that I liked, and and we had a Snow White concert at school, and I used to act out that Snow White concert with my toys, uh, and sing all the songs. And my mother realized I had a good singing voice, and then beyond that, I started liking pop music when I was in standard 5, which is when you're about 12 years old. And then I started making hit parades. I listened to the Springbok radio top 20, and I started making hit parades and collecting records. Like when I got that pocket money, it had moved up to, I think it was R1 a week by then or something. And then I used to get a 7 single. So I used to get a different hit for my hit parade every week and collect those and pretend I was a DJ and spin the records. Now, for some of you, won't really know what records are, or actually they're making a comeback, so maybe you will. But yes, that was the music. So after that, when I was a teenager, okay, so 14 to 20, no, 15 to 21. Okay, I was in high school, and of course, we're all interested in boys and that type of stuff, and experimenting with smoking, which I did experiment with, but fortunately I didn't become a smoker because I didn't really like the taste of it. But my friend and I used to go to the lane and sneak and and have a smoke, and because we were trying to be big, and that's what used to happen in those days. So yes, with the boys, when I look back on that, I had some disastrous so-called relationships with boys, and I gave myself a different name for each time period. So when I was the singer, my name, I call myself now Pearl because Pearl was a singer. Okay, there's a song Pearl's a singer, and I kind of relate to that. Um, and then I was Petunia because I was very delicate. I was like a delicate flower when I was a teenager, but I was also a bit rebellious in some ways. So so that was until I was 21, and then when I was 20, I actually left and went to work in Cape Town because I qualified. Well, it was part of my practical as a medical technologist, and I enjoyed living in Cape Town. And but then I went back up to where my parents lived, which was actually a mistake. I should have just stayed where I was in retrospect. But I really didn't enjoy being back in their house because I realized that I had my independence when I was in Cape Town. I had my own car, I had a Volkswagen Beetle, I had my own salary, and then I was back in the place, and I got a job in Johannesburg, but it was so hectic. It was like a factory, and I hated it because it was really on another level of hecticness. So I quit that job in a few months, and then I spent my earnings to go overseas. And then I had um, more issues in my life which were quite traumatic, which I might discuss in another video. But they shaped my life somewhat, and then I was, society dictated much more in those days than it does now. Although I suppose in different ways it probably just dictates as well now. So excuse my coughing. Yeah. So when I was 29, 28, I thought I was doing such a good thing because I found a nice boy from the church, and he seemed to take a shine to me, and so proposed to me and got married. And I thought, well, he's a nice, kind person. But it ended up that my marriage just, I was emotionally abused in my marriage, and I I ended up, staying in it for far too long. All right, so but when I first got married, I was Jane. My name, called myself Jane. Okay, that period was called Delilah in my 20s. And I'm not going to explain why, because I'm sure maybe each of you also have your Delilah moments, if it even is a thing these days. Okay, and then, but yes, because I rebelled from society, but then in the end, the mores of society were too strong for me, and then I decided to do the right thing and get married. But the person I married, because I had been through quite a bit of trauma, um, I, in retrospect, I would have done better if I knew what I know now. But anyway, the thing is that I wanted children, and I had two girls, um, and that was the best thing about being Jane, 29 to 35, being a mother. But then I had a job, but then my husband moved away to some country town for 6 months, and I left my job, and I never got another job after that because my second daughter was born premature and required a lot of care. And then he said, "Oh, work for me." But I had a BCom degree, which I had studied also part time, because I knew that I wanted to do more with my life, after being a medical technologist, even. Um, and so I got my BCom degree, and I thought I want to use it. So I got into time management training. I was also in this network marketing business, which is another story. The best thing about it is that it motivated me to read a lot of books and write out the course on time management. So and the course and the book. And I eventually became a trainer. And no one ever thought I could become a trainer because I was so shy. But for a while, my business worked out very well. Um, but then afterwards, I started doubting myself because it seemed like everyone else was entering the world and the world of training, and other people were doing time management and etc. Whereas my book was actually unique, and I didn't realize that I was being devalued at home. My husband had had jobs where he had been fired from a couple of them, and and then my father-in-law, took me aside one day and said, "Oh, I'm ignoring my children," and that was a very sensitive point for me because my children are everything to me. So I thought, okay, well, and I took the I took my foot off the pedal, so to speak, with my business, and I didn't reaccredit it because it was CETA accredited, and I spent more time with my children and fetching and carrying my children and fetching my husband from work and focusing on my family and then also in the network marketing business, which really didn't go anywhere for me because I first of all I don't think because I had the confidence really. I had lost confidence after having such a creative period. I call myself Aurora because I woke up for a while when I was 35 to 42 and actually created the business and wrote the book. And but after that, I call myself Christine because my brain was a fog. So and that comes from Phantom of the Opera because she had the phantom inside her head. I had something inside my head, but I didn't know what it was. Just confusion and and a lack of clarity. So when I was uh, in my 50s, I, re- I realized that I wanted to write a book on emotional intelligence when the network marketing business I was in, that particular part of it, team of it collapsed because the leader um, turned out to be taking advantage of a lot of things and very greedy and diabolical in his dealings. So so I had that as well. So it kind of lost me some confidence. So when I was in my 50s, I wrote the book Rainbow of Resilience. But when I wrote the book, I was really trying to see what the issue was with my marriage, where I knew my husband had some deep issues, and there were things that I should never have accepted, which happened with my husband and which he did. But but still, I wrote the book, and of course, he planned the launch, and we had about 60 people at the launch. But after that, I didn't even promote the book because things just got very difficult in my personal life, and the trauma that I had from my 20s returned, and plus I realized that there was something with my husband. Should I stay? Should I leave? Um, because I didn't feel he wasn't treating me well. But on the other hand, he said he loved me, um, and I really wanted my family to stick together. So it was for my girls that I stuck it out. And okay, so but when I was from 50 to 56, that's when I call myself Bridget, because Bridget is the warrior. She's Bridget is an Irish name, but it actually means warrior. And that's when I started. Well, the problem was I spent a lot of money escaping because I did come into my investment started maturing, but I did have to. I did find that I wanted to escape a lot to figure out what was happening to me, and I went to. I traveled a lot as much as I could. I had started my own business with writing and editing and proofreading. It was a small business. It earned a small amount of money, but every bit of money I earned, I actually went traveling just to escape. I didn't realize why I wanted to escape because I kept on making excuses for my husband. And in that period, I wrote two more books, which were also a personal topic, which I don't really even resonate with anymore, but that version of me did. Okay, so then when I was 57, we got the COVID pandemic came along, and that's when we had to be on lockdown. And that's actually in 2020 is when I healed a lot because I used to write reams and reams and reams in a journal. And then in 2023, I went to New York. And that also, for the reason I went there and just for the traveling of it and the perspective, that also gave me more perspective and helped me to heal a lot. But it didn't stop me from not knowing what was happening in my marriage and going back again and again, even after I left and went and lived in Johannesburg twice. I was hoovered back, but this might give you an idea of what I was dealing with. And when I say I was hoovered back in 2024, um, so and that's after that I finally left at the age of 60. I left first at the age of 60, 61, and then I and then I left again and moved back to Johannesburg, and so I'm starting over, which is not a very good time of life to be starting over, like in your early 60s. So I'm sorry that I didn't see the toxic behavior. Well, I did actually see it before, but I didn't really. I thought I could deal with it because I didn't know what it was. So that's my story about why I'm actually doing this course. So you can see why I'm doing this course. It's basically all the courses I've done have really been for my own personal development and whoever can benefit from them over and above that. Um, that's what I want to do. I want to help as many people like myself as possible who might have found themselves in a similar situation. And so the timeline is basically going over all those periods of life and really looking in depth about who you were, what version of yourself were you, what, who are you really, based on all that, who are you really, um, who have you become, what do you like, what do you enjoy, what don't you like, what won't you ever do again, what won't you go back to, what, uh, these are questions you maybe need to be asking when you're younger, but better late than never. Uh, it's never too late to actually change course. Although it's not very easy in a lot of realms, like it takes a lot out of you. But if you work through the process, um, it's possible to make a plan and do that And okay, so this is the second of the series on individuation. Um, I've really been talking from the soul over here, and it doesn't really, maybe, probably doesn't sound extremely articulate, or you know, um, silver tongued. I was trying to find a word, but yeah, it's a process. So the program is called Standing, STANDING, Standing Up for Yourself, and it's an acronym for okay, so we've done self-awareness and we've done the timeline. Okay, so this is the timeline. So you remember what you need to do. It's always better to do it by hand, I find. So get maybe an A4 book and draw it out, and write down everything you know from each period of your life, however old you are, young you are. It's a good idea to start now, because the insights you have might save you later from having to do the heck of a lot of work, which I'm having to do at the moment. Um, I mean, the work on myself, but at least there's information out there, and you can find out about these things uh, way earlier, because people are more informed about such issues like uh, like psychological abuse that probably happened in the olden days, but people didn't know about it. So I just feel relieved that I can actually work through it, although I have a way to go in certain areas. But yes, that's it. So thank you for listening, and then I'll be back. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back in a week or so with the next section. I hope this helps. Thanks so much. Bye bye.